mutant aliens, haywire security droids, extraterrestrial diseases. Hey, is this even a fantasy module we're talking about? You bet your dice it is. Come with me. We're off to the barrier peaks. So, welcome everyone. I'm Gary, and today we are going to talk about Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, which was originally published in 1980. It was run by Gary Gygax at Origins 2, so it was run as a tournament module. It's 30 pages long, and it was finally published for the public, as I said, in 1980. It's an AD&D module. It's actually quite a high-level AD&D module. It's for characters of level 8 to 12, so it's for experienced adventurers, and it's for experienced players. And before we get going, it's just worth saying I own 3 copies of this module in various forms, like various editions. This is an original for the first edition. It's not the first printing, but it's an original for the first edition. Inside, like a lot of these first edition modules, it comes with a kind of like a fold-out center, which is brilliant, wonderful. And then it comes with 2 books, one of which is an art book, which you don't get with every AD&D module, but this module in particular makes use of a lot of art. I also own this version. This is Dungeons of Dread. This was published in 2013 as a kind of reprint for first edition, and it contains all of the S series of adventures. This is the one that through which I first came across this module. And I remember reading it. I remember buying this in 2013, 11 years ago, and thinking, wow, this is really cool. I need to get some of these on the table. And I've since put all of the S series on the table. And then the last version that I own is this. This is Goodman Games' original adventures reincarnated. It contains a copy of the original version of the module for AD&D, and then a 5e update, as well as some interesting extension material. Now, before we get going, I'm going to say that I'm going to be talking about the version in Dungeons of Dread. That's the one that I'm, put on the table the most often when I've run this. But it is worth saying that the Goodman Games versions sometimes get a kind of reputation for just only being good for sort of collectors. They're not. They're really good. They've got lots of extended material, and as Goodman Games are known for, they write really good box text. That's something that's not in the formatting for first edition AD&D modules, but it is in this, and it's really, really helpful. So I want to say that while I have run it before, and I've never run it exclusively with this version, I have actually run it online using this particular version because it's got some really, really useful bonus material. So first of all, just before we get started, I've talked about this before, but a lot of these illustrations in this book are done by Errol Otis. There's loads of illustrations in this book. We're going to talk about all of them, but they're done by Errol Otis, the venerable Errol Otis. I reviewed his module, The House on the Island. You can see that here. I've talked about this before, but the end pages for this particular version are absolutely wonderful. This is everything that I want from role playing, and you should get this version just for that. So my bona fides before we start talking. Now I always say I don't like talking about modules with any authority. I don't talk with any authority anyway. Let's not trick anyone. But I especially don't like talking about anything with any authority if I haven't run it. And I have run this. I've run it 3 times. I haven't run it to completion 3 times. I've run it to completion twice. The first time I ran it for AD&D, we didn't get all the way through. We kind of did the first couple of levels, and then the characters, because it was a sandbox campaign, moved on to something else. And then I've run it again using Frank Mentzer's Beckme. I don't know if anyone actually says that as a word, but Basic Expert Companion Master Immortals. And I ran that during the pandemic online. And then I've most recently run it using my own old school system, Journeyman Expert Master, all 3 times. It was absolutely wonderful. I had so much fun. And, I just want to kind of emphasize and get that out there straight away that this is one of the best modules that you could ever run. So let's talk about the through line. What is the kind of story? Well, basically, strange monsters have been plaguing the Duchy of Jeff, which is a place in the Greyhawk setting. I've never set this in Greyhawk, but just so you know. And the party have been hired to go and investigate this kind of like strange dungeon location where these monsters are coming from. Now, unknown to the players when they start, the dungeon that they're going to is a crashed spaceship, and it's been crashed for some time. And basically, the entrance of it has been revealed, and monsters are coming out. There's an absolutely fantastic illustration, not by artist, actually. I forget the name of the artist, of a droid throwing a boule out of the side door. See if I can put it on, because it's really, really, really good. The spacecraft has become kind of accessible, and some of the creatures in the spacecraft, including the droids, are leaving, beginning to explore this world that they find themselves on, and vice versa. Monsters in the area starting to enter this particular dungeon. The party enters the spacecraft, and they don't initially know its true nature. I don't know if it's meant to be a big reveal, but given the illustrations, everyone works out straight away there. So, oh wow, this is a spacecraft. I want to say that as a teenager, when I would have read this sort of 11 years ago, I really hated the idea of science fantasy, this idea of mixing sci-fi with fantasy games, which but actually, I'm just like, oh yeah, this is brilliant. This is exactly totally what I want. I just wish there was like four more of this kind of adventure of this scale because it's huge. So the party enter the spacecraft. They begin this 6-level dungeon. It's a massive dungeon, which is broken into living quarters, zoo habitats, leisure decks, a series of industrial decks that break up, and all sorts of other weird science fiction kind of breakdowns. One of the most fun things is coming up with ways of describing kind of modern items and modern materials, to the players. I think the way plastic key cards are described is like being made of a strange horn-like material. It's like, oh, that's brilliant. And so they collect, as they begin to explore, they can collect a series of items, such as key cards that give them access to more parts of the ship. And they begin to piece together an implied narrative. It's never explicitly stated. They don't find a kind of, a note anywhere that says this is what happened to the ship. It's implied they can work it out based on a series of different encounters. And, I'll say the first time I ran this all the way through, the party didn't really work out what had happened, but it didn't impede their enjoyment anyway. But this is not a yam-shaped adventure. I've talked about yam-shaped adventures before. You can see that here. This is, I don't know, like a pear-shaped adventure, a really focused start that just broadens out and broadens out and broadens out. It's up to the player to discover what's going on, which can be really rewarding when they do. So they wander around these kind of ancient corridors, these forgotten kind of like ducts, very kind of like Star Trek, very kind of 1970s sci-fi. And the nature of the crew's demise can become apparent. And what has happened is that the spacecraft fell victim. The crew of the spacecraft fell victim to a horrible plague that drove them mad and then eventually killed them. And then the ship landed in this particular world, in this particular dimension. So let's talk about what I liked. Oh God, there's loads. I mean, what don't I like? This is a fantastic experimental blending of science fiction and fantasy, and it's obviously just Gygax just like letting the creative juices to flow straight out of his fingertips and into the typewriter because this is wonderful. And you know what? I will admit that when I was younger, this probably would have put me off. And actually, that punk, mad desire, willingness to kind of blend these two things together and accept that they are not kind of mutually exclusive is one of the things that makes this module wonderful. There's loads and loads of art. I mean, absolutely tons of art in there's a whole book dedicated to art. It reminds me of the Tomb of Horrors in that sense. So there's pretty much everything is illustrated, and it's you're directed by the text when to show things. I mean, it's absolutely wonderful. And one thing that I really, really like about the artwork, and it's conveyed through the artwork, is the retrofuturism of the 1970s. It's an unintentional retrofuturism, right? This is what Gygax and people, in that particular context, that particular time, thought science fiction, what the future would be like, what space travel would be like. And it's really enjoyable to explore this time capsule, this kind of like bottled zeitgeist, kind of tautology, bottled zeitgeist, but this kind of like zeitgeist version of science fiction that no one would ever create anymore unless consciously. Looking at kind of conscious retrofuturism, like something like Fallout. I love the fact that because it is a true old school module, it's not an old school revivalist or Renaissance module. It's a true old school module. There's some things like the fact that it's 6 decks. The characters go down. As they go down, it becomes more and more dangerous. There's a real telegraphed growing sense of threat. And if you just say to your players, the deeper you go into this place, the more dangerous it's going to be. And the first level, for example, is they're just trying. The players just find themselves trying to feel the place out. They come across some veggie pygmies. They can come across some spacesuits. There's quite involved and interesting mechanics for. It's like a flowchart of how they work out what a piece of technology does. That's really helpful because it stops players, not characters, from going, well, I know what this is. This is a spacesuit. You put it on and this is what happens. You go, no, there's this process for your character working out what it does. And that idea of veggie pygmies, I think this is the first module with the veggie pygmies ever. all add to that strange, alien, weird vibe. That idea of disease and plague and like weirdness and infection of these otherwise clean corridors. The sense of threat increases as they head deeper. And one thing that's really cool, I love it. There's a huge floor that's just a sort of zoo where there's a massive balcony and they can see down into this enormous habitat, this enormous kind of garden, this like jungly garden. And I think it's ropers. There's a group of ropers that have they're hanging their ropes over the side of this balcony. But what they've done is they've covered themselves in detritus from the spacecraft. Like they cover themselves in things, like packing boxes, because they think it's stone, because they're monsters that have entered this artificial environment and they haven't comprehended that they're not in this kind of like natural underground place anymore. And it's like the players come across these stilted stumps of like rubbish that attack them. It's like, no, they're ropers. They're natural camouflage that they would normally carapace themselves in. They've misinterpreted the fact that these things are artificial. There's really, really, really cool stuff going on. There is actually a few just really choice encounters, and I'll admit that probably as you get deeper, there's an auditorium on the final level, the leisure level, and in there's a mind flayer, and it establishes the mind flayers as an alien threat as well as a kind of like frightening monster. It conveys them as extraterrestrial creatures that are seeking to dominate this world. There's a real sense of kind of fear that they have, but it's in an auditorium, right? It's in like a kind of like sort of cinema where they get attacked. And I always have it floating around and using its psychic blast. It's just so much fun going on there. There's a room with androids. And they're illustrated beautifully, retrofuturistically, beautifully, and they're kind of like kickboxing and practicing, and they can attack the players. But I think my favorite encounter of the whole dungeon is the swimming pool on the leisure deck. There's a disused swimming pool, and there's an Eye of the Deep in it. Which I just think's like wonderful. Like there's a nautically like water aquatic beholder living in there. I'm gonna read you the description. Let's have a look. It's because it's just wonderful. It's not box text, but you just have to hear it. So, during the plague madness, a whole laboratory aquarium tank was ordered dumped into the swimming pool by an insane technician. And of course, the worker robots obeyed. This carefully watched tank contained several dozen tiny monsters taken from some strange world, and one managed to survive the transition to nearly fresh water, the Eye of the Deep. Subsequent dumpings added food creatures to the pool so the monster could feed and grow. Although the water is too shallow and not of the proper chemical balance, the eye manages to get along. Although it is small and stunted despite its decades of age, it preys upon the smaller inhabitants of the pool, blind crayfish, turtles, snails, etc., and anything coming down to its waters to drink. The monster dwells in the deeper northern half of the pool, and when the party approaches, it will cast an illusion that it is a jumble of bones lying upon the bottom. Viewers will see human skeletons in the swimming pool, one with a glinting metal tube. I mean, come on, that is just cool. I like the fact that you can describe the kind of strange flickering reflections of light off of the torches they swim, or the smell of chlorine, and try to describe that in ways that, medieval themed characters can understand is wonderful. And then they get attacked by a beholder that's got claws. It's like, oh my god, this is great. I absolutely adore this module. I'm just going to keep saying it because it's true. So what I'd change? Well, to be honest with you, very little. Really very little, and because it's so well written. The prose is, some people say high Gygaxian, right? Kind of quite dense. But one thing that I like about high Gygaxian prose, and one thing I love about Gary Gygax's writing voice, is that you can intuit an intention there. Even if he doesn't say the player should do this, you can intuit a naturalism from the prose, which is just wonderful. So even if you don't run this, which you should, read it because you'll get a lot out of it. The two things that I have changed, or what would be areas of concern that I would emphasize. I would enforce a timer, especially if it's part of the sandbox. The ship could be under nuclear meltdown, and the players have got a certain amount of time to stop that, or the ship's going to blow up, or have it void bomb itself out of existence. But the party have only got a certain amount of time to be in there. That just stops them from aimlessly wandering forever and ever and ever. The other thing that I would recommend doing is the party's employer, whoever that is, the patron that's sending them there, Don't have them just discover the ship by themselves. Have someone send them there, and they want to. They've been on an expedition before, and they want to recover something particular. It might be the body of a fallen comrade in a certain place. It just gives a focus to the delves because there's so many rooms where it's just like it's the same description. It's just empty cabins, and actually, it's really helpful to signpost a reason for them to go deeper and deeper and to look for particular landmarks within the ship. The other thing is the ship, as I said, has been crashed for some time. I've never done that. I actually always have it as a falling star. The characters learn very quickly, the players learn very quickly that this is a science fiction themed module and that it's a spacecraft. I think that merely adds to that thematic quality. If it's a shooting, if they see something come down and crash, it's just wonderful. So, as ever, I will pick this up. I think this is the best version of the module, or maybe just the original version that will be available on Drive. I do think the Goodman Games version is fantastic. It's just a bit unwieldy, right? If you're going to be using it at the table, you're not going to be able to stand up and walk around with it at all, and you're going to have to really pass that and really kind of get to grips with it because there's so much extra material. There's a really good piece of extra material in that actually, which is the characters entering a VR environment and playing a kind of medieval themed fantasy game, which is really good fun, which I've run before. But as ever, pick it up, do all that good stuff like and subscribe. I really appreciate that. Many thanks as ever. Thank you for listening to my ramblings. I'll speak with you again soon.